This animated blueprint details the forensic profile of a perfect match. It is the biological evidence that ultimately secured a first-degree murder conviction against Pennsylvania State Trooper Kevin Foley for the April 2006 killing of Dr. John Yelenic. That conviction was entirely dependent on biological material, specifically cellular tissue found trapped underneath the murder victim's fingernails. Securing that conviction required the lead investigator, Corporal Janelle Lyde, to commit an extreme operational breach. She had to intentionally violate core standardized evidence handling protocols. Standard procedure dictates immediate transfer of biological evidence to the state crime laboratory for processing. Lyde intercepted the fingernail clippings and deliberately withheld them from the system. She placed the biological samples in a plastic container and hid them inside a police break room refrigerator, leaving them unanalyzed for 10 full months. She took this drastic action because the primary suspect was an active duty state trooper. The investigator recognized a severe insider threat within the very law enforcement apparatus designed to process the evidence. When an investigation involves an insider threat, strict adherence to standard procedure creates a severe vulnerability. The protocol itself becomes the exact mechanism that destroys a case. The case began on the afternoon of April 13, 2006, when a 9-year-old neighborhood boy walked into Dr. Yelenic's Blairsville home and discovered the body. This top-down floor plan maps the immediate physical data points. In the front foyer, investigators found a shattered glass panel next to the door and massive blood spatter indicating extreme arterial loss. A preliminary assessment of Dr. Yelenic's body revealed severe defensive wounds on his hands and fingers, establishing a high probability of biological transfer from his attacker. Investigators also isolated a bloody footprint tracking from the living room toward the front door. The dimensions were far too large to belong to the child who found the scene. Inside the living room, they logged a $15,000 uncashed check written by a neighbor named Melissa, attached to a note explicitly asking Dr. Yelenic to wait a few days before depositing it. Scattered across the coffee table directly next to that check were physical copies of Dr. Yelenic's ongoing, highly contested divorce papers. The physical state of the home ruled out a standard home invasion. High-value electronics were untouched and drawers remained closed. The extreme, chaotic violence of the multiple stab wounds indicated a targeted attack. This specific combination of high-emotion violence and disparate physical evidence, a neighbor's death sitting next to legal separation documents, requires investigators to systematically separate overlapping motives to find the true causal mechanism. This comparative chart isolates the first viable motive vector, financial debt. The $15,000 loan from his neighbor Melissa was compounded by neighborhood rumors that the two were engaged in a romantic affair. The second motive vector centers on the high-stakes custodial battle. Dr. Yelenic and his estranged wife Michelle were in a bitter multi-year legal fight over the custody of their adopted son. Michelle was also listed as the primary beneficiary of Dr. Yelenic's life insurance policy. His death would immediately trigger a payout of several $1,000,000, adding a massive financial incentive to the custodial dispute. The $15,000 debt from the neighbor carried less weight when contextualized against the victim's baseline financial security. Dr. Yelenic was a highly successful dentist who had leveraged his practice into $1,000,000 real estate investments. Yet, despite his wealth, he had been experiencing extreme paranoia in the weeks prior to the murder. He was so convinced he was being targeted that he paid an attorney a $10,000 retainer specifically to investigate his own potential homicide. Investigators systematically eliminated the neighbor, Melissa, as a physical suspect. The raw scale of the physical violence and the dimensions of the bloody footprint did not match her physical profile. By eliminating the neighbor's financial debt as the primary causal mechanism, the investigation successfully isolated the custodial dispute and Michelle's immediate circle as the true operational threat. The data quickly pointed to a new primary suspect, Michelle's boyfriend, Kevin Foley. Foley was a sworn Pennsylvania state trooper. Foley harbored deep, specific animus toward Dr. Yelenic. During the divorce proceedings, Michelle had made severe allegations that Dr. Yelenic was abusing their son. Even though officials ruled the claims completely unfounded, Foley fully believed them. This flowchart illustrates standardized forensic protocol. Corporal Lyde was required by departmental rules to submit the fingernail clippings containing the killer's DNA directly to the state lab. A strict chain of custody relies on sequential logging. Physical evidence is sealed, documented, and transported through a predictable bureaucratic pipeline. But here, the protocol created a systemic risk. Sending the biological evidence to the state police crime lab meant handing it over to the exact agency where the primary suspect held authority. To counter this risk, Corporal Lyde initiated a shadow protocol. She bypassed the logging system and sequestered the DNA samples in an unmonitored precinct refrigerator, keeping the physical evidence under her direct, localized control. Doing all this meant stalling the investigation. Over the next 10 months, Lyde faced extreme public and media scrutiny. The victim's family, unaware of her strategy, viewed her as incompetent and unacceptably slow. Lyde utilized investigative noise to manage this strain. When the neighbor brought psychics to the crime scene, Lyde allowed it, using the spectacle to placate the agitated family and buy herself administrative time. Absorbing immense professional scrutiny and appearing incompetent is sometimes a necessary tactical requirement to protect raw evidence from institutional tampering. After 10 months of perceived inaction, Dr. Yelenic's family reached a breaking point and formally petitioned the Pennsylvania State Attorney General to take over the investigation. This formal escalation of authority was the exact trigger Corporal Lyde had been waiting for. The Attorney General's involvement reclassified the murder, shifting it from a stalled local investigation to a state-level priority. This shift in authority satisfied the specific jurisdictional requirements Lyde needed to petition for federal assets. This timeline illustrates the maneuver. By waiting for the Attorney General's intervention, Lyde successfully bypassed the compromised state police lab entirely and shipped the preserved fingernails directly to the FBI. Federal scientists processed the DNA inside a highly secure environment, completely isolated from Kevin Foley's sphere of influence or internal network. Intentionally stalling a local investigation to invite external oversight can be leveraged tactically. It forces a jurisdictional escalation that unlocks higher-tier forensic resources that are otherwise inaccessible. The FBI lab results delivered definitive proof. The DNA extracted from beneath Dr. Yelenic's fingernails was a pristine, uncompromised match for State Trooper Kevin Foley. The data allowed investigators to reconstruct the attack. Around 12:30 a.m., Foley breached the unlocked back door of the home and approached Dr. Yelenic while he slept on the couch. Foley drove a single-edged knife down in an initial strike. The victim woke up and mounted a desperate physical defense, clawing at Foley and trapping the trooper's cellular tissue under his nails. The struggle violently moved from the living room out toward the foyer, scattering the divorce papers across the floor in the process. Dr. Yelenic broke free and reached for the front door, but Foley shoved him from behind. The impact drove Dr. Yelenic's head through the side glass panel, severing his jugular. Foley walked out the front door, highly confident he would never be caught. His assurance relied entirely on his status as a state trooper, protecting him from scrutiny within the state's own forensic system. Navigating compromised forensic environments requires investigators to view rigid administrative procedures not as absolute laws, but as variables that must be strategically managed, delayed, or broken entirely to protect the truth.